Well, I would like to start with saying thank you to Sky Woman for giving us spirit. Thank you to Grandmother Moon for giving us our blood and all the ties and the waters on this beautiful Mother Earth. I would like to say thank you, Mother Earth, for giving us all the beautiful medicines like the animals and the cetaceans in the sea. I would like to say thank you to all the mothers for giving us guidance and giving us life, from the little baby girl to the eldest.
Thank you.
Katherine?
So hi, Paul. My name is Katherine. I've been working with Annik at PhiLab, and I'm the person that takes care of all of communications for the research lab. But we're a philanthropy research network in Canada that really is trying to gain more information and knowledge about the Canadian philanthropic sector, how grant making is done, as well as how it can improve, because there's of course always room for improvement. And my job is really trying to make more connections with different actors in the sector so that we can have as much of a good overall picture of it as possible. So my background is also in environmental development. So I worked a lot on sustainable development practices and also especially for animal rights. So I worked for many years with the SPA Canada as well as the SPCA of Montreal, working on different issues. But of course, I was very involved in a lot of animal rights campaigns, especially about veganism and for-profit pounds, etc. So I have a big background in environment and in animals, which is why I was so excited to work on this special edition. And when Annik said that she could get an interview with you, I was over the moon, and I'm very excited and very thankful that you took the time.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Well, I was one of the founding directors of Greenpeace, and that was in 1972 when we established Greenpeace. And then I left Greenpeace in 77 to set up Sea Shepherd. And the reason being is that I felt that there was a need to actually take action and not just a protest. I'm not really a protester. And so I set Sea Shepherd up to intervene against illegal activities primarily. And with a specific strategy, which I call aggressive nonviolence, which means that we're going to aggressively intervene, but we're not going to hurt anybody. And after 45 years, we haven't killed or hurt anybody. So we're quite proud of that record. But we have shut down literally hundreds and hundreds of illegal activities. We've driven the Japanese whalers out of the southern oceans where they were killing whales illegally. And now today we've got 10 ships out on the ocean. And we're in partnerships with numerous countries. It was actually quite a novel thing for an NGO to partner with various governments. It started in Ecuador when we partnered with the Galapagos National Park to protect the marine reserve in 1999. But beginning in 2015, we really ramped that up because of we had a 110-day pursuit of an ice fish poacher called the Thunder. It was the longest pursuit of a poacher in maritime history. And that actually got us involved with various countries and with Interpol. And we then got invited to work with various countries. So now we're in partnership with like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cabo Verde, Sao Tome, Namibia, Tanzania, Ghana, the Gambia, and also in Latin America with Peru, Panama, and Mexico. And what that means is that we go into their waters with our resources and they provide the authority for us to intervene. Beyond the 200-mile limit, though, we operate under the principles of the United Nations World Charter for Nature, which allows for intervention, to uphold international conservation law. And so that's what we've been doing now for 45 years. And Sea Shepherd's no longer an organization. It's now a movement. It's a global movement. We're in about 42 different countries, but they're all separate entities.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So my question especially is going to be around different funding issues. So one of the first questions I had was, how did you finance the first purchase of the first Sea Shepherd ship?
Well, actually, two conservative organizations actually helped me out. One was Cleveland Amory's Fund for Animals based in New York City. And I went to Cleveland in order to get help to oppose the killing of seals. And he said, well, what do you need? I said, I need a ship. And he said, well, so he gave me $120,000 to find a ship. So I found the ship in England. And great, but now I didn't have any money to operate it. So then I went to the RSPCA, and they gave me a £50,000 donation. So that was our first campaign. And after that, we just sort of, raised money. Actually, for the second ship, we lost our first ship in the battle with a pirate whaler. But for the second ship, I sold the movie rights to the incident with the pirate whaler to Warner Brothers, and that financed our second ship.
Does Sea Shepherd mostly rely on volunteers from its member base to operate the rest of its costs?
Yes, we've always been primarily a volunteer organization. We've had about, I'd say, 7,000 volunteers over the years. And right now, at any given moment, there'd be 250 volunteers on those ships, and also on shore campaigns in various areas of the world. So we're primarily a volunteer organization. In the beginning, actually, volunteers were more than just volunteers. They actually had to pay to come on board, because otherwise we couldn't afford the fuel. So you could volunteer with $1,000, and that helped to purchase the fuel. But now we don't need to do that anymore. So volunteers are now only responsible for their travel to get to the ship and to get back, but they're provided with room and board and all that.
That's really an interesting funding model for sure, to pay for volunteering, but it definitely helps the cause, right?
I called it the Tom Sawyer approach.
Very interesting. So since 1977, have your tactics evolved since then, like from either a political standpoint or from an action standpoint? And have you run into any specific conflicts that have led to these changes in strategy?
We actually haven't changed, other than the partnership program, which we started with Ecuador and now with many other countries. That's a definite change in strategy. But direct intervention using aggressive nonviolence has been our main approach, and that hasn't really changed. Where we were considered once quite radical, it's not that we've changed, that we sort of becoming a bit mainstream, but it's only because I think of the desperation on the part of governments and companies around the world that see what's happening to the planet, and therefore they want to do something and get involved. So we're getting a lot more support from various companies and, of course, various governments. Strangely enough, I was we were invited by John Kerry to join the American Security Council, and we're actually having meetings with admirals and things like that. And they teach what we do at the United States Naval War College, because what they're looking for is ways to deal with illegal fishing, which the military, like the Pentagon and that, consider a threat to national security. And the problem is that governments around the world really have no experience on dealing with those issues. I mean, they really put all their attention on drug intervention, but really been no effort to do intervene against illegal fishing operations. And that's becoming a major problem. And so we're the only people that have been doing it. So that's why they've been coming to us to see, how we can work with them to do that.
That's really interesting that now, not only before, I feel it was more that you were getting lawsuits for doing your actions, and now governments are inviting you for your advice. That's a pretty strong evolution.
Well, the interesting thing is we've never been convicted of any felonies, and also in the lawsuits we've won every one of them. We've won in the courts. I've always felt that the courtroom is an extension of our confrontations in the field, and so you have to have a good understanding of the workings of the law. About 10 years ago, I was invited to give a lecture to the FBI in Quantico, and one of the special agents there said, Sea Shepherd's walking a pretty fine line when it's come to the law. And I said, yeah, well, does it really matter how fine that line is, as long as you don't cross the line? And we don't cross that line. There might be a perception that we do, but we don't. And of course, and there's a lot of stories, a lot of people out there think that we're a bunch of terrorists and we go around killing people and everything. And I don't really care if they believe that, because that really makes our job easier. When we show up and the poachers are there, they're scared to death of us. They think that, our Jolly Roger flag and everything, they think that we're going to torpedo them and send them all to the bottom. Of course, we're not going to do that, but perception goes a long ways towards, getting things done that way.
Do you feel like social media, since it's been more prominent, obviously, in the last 10, 20 years, do you feel like that has changed the impact that you can have on your different campaigns?
Well, I think so, but we've always been good at understanding the nature of media. We live in a media culture, so you have to adapt to that. I mean, one of the reasons Greenpeace became so successful was really the first environmental organization to understand that the power of the media. And it's no accident that Greenpeace was established by journalists and broadcasters and communications majors. That's the people who set up Greenpeace. And I was a communication major at the time at Simon Fraser University. But I feel that you have to evolve with that changing medium. One of the things that I did to get Sea Shepherd really going, though, was back in 2006. I went to all the different networks in the US and I said, look, the biggest show on TV right now, or on Discovery right now, is a bunch of guys who go into a cold, remote area to catch crabs. And I can give you men and women going to a far colder, more remote, more hostile environment to save whales. It has to be more compelling than catching crabs every week. And Animal Planet went for it. I wish Discovery had it, but Animal Planet went for it. And it was their top show for 7 years. And the reason it isn't there now is because we won and the Japanese are no longer in the Southern Ocean killing whales.
That's a pretty nice success. This to end the series of the show, you can say, well, it doesn't exist anymore. So.
Yeah, and also though, what that did was it shot up our support base of like 1,000% because of that television coverage from that show. I mean, we took what was going on in Antarctica and put it around the world in people's rooms, or living rooms, and that got us an awful lot of support. Well, what we've been doing since then is doing a lot of documentaries. Documentary on myself called Watson. We did Sea of Shadows about the Vaquita campaign in the Gulf of California. Also, the big one was Seaspiracy. And Seaspiracy was successful also because it's a good documentary, but also the medium sometimes is more important than the message it conveys. So the fact that you can get it onto a thing like Netflix will guarantee you reaching many more people. And it's better, and that way you can reach people, the unconverted. What's the point of making a documentary with everybody who agrees with you is going to see it? The point is to make those documentaries and get it out to people who have never heard of you. And that's why Seaspiracy was so effective.
Speaking of funding, so when you talk about these documentaries, such as the series on Animal Planet or Seaspiracy, would these be also helping fund the more direct actions as well as being education and awareness campaigns?
Well, both, yes. They're educational, but also we get a lot of people then support us or join up with us and everything because of those. People have never even heard of Sea Shepherd, see Seaspiracy, and say, well, how can I get involved? And so it certainly has helped that way. We've always maintained, tried to keep our administrative overhead very, very low. We don't have offices really, and we don't have a lot of highly paid administrators and things like this. But the other thing we don't do is we don't do fundraising. That is, we don't do direct mail. We don't spend money to raise money. That was something I decided to do when I set up Sea Shepherd, is that I want people to know that when they donate make a donation, that donation goes to the ships and the campaigns, and we can tell them exactly what it's being spent on. A lot of these organizations, like for instance, I can speak for Greenpeace because I was a founding director. Greenpeace brings in about $350 million a year, actually 350 million euros a year. And they spend about 70 to 80 million on fundraising, that keeps generating that. So they keep having to do that. Now, we don't bring in nearly that much. I think we about 20 million totally. But we don't spend any money on fundraising to do it. But what we're able to achieve with that 20 million is what they can't do with their 350 million. We have 10 ships, they have 3. They hardly do anything with those ships. We do things all the time with them. Our strength lies in our volunteer base, not in the monies that we have. And so money has not been the motivating, factor for pushing getting Sea Shepherd campaigns to be successful. I don't ask people for money. We don't, beg for people's support. And when I originally set it up, I said, look, we're doing something I think that is going to benefit the world, that needs to be done. And if people see what we're doing, then they're going to volunteer and support us. And that, in fact, is what has happened. Recently, we just got a person in Dax de Silva in Montreal just gave us, $4.5 million on that. And but here's his motivation, a lot of other motivations, is that you can sponsor a ship. And so our vessel, the Bob Barker, that's because Bob Barker gave us $5 million. He actually didn't want us to name the ship after him, but I said, look, if we name the ship after you, that's going to really encourage other people to get involved too. And so then Sam Simon, the creator of The Simpsons, gave us $3 million to buy a ship, which was the Sam Simon. And then Dax de Silva did this one, which is called Age of Union, after his company. John Paul DeJoria of Paul Mitchell Shampoos and Patron Tequila, he sponsors the John Paul DeJoria, which is one of our patrol vessels for the Vikita campaign. Chris Sharp of Sharpie, his corporation, he wanted to call it Sharpie, I don't know why, but anyway, that vessel is sponsored in there too. Farley Moa gave us $250,000, and we had the vessel, the Farley Moa. Actually, we've had two vessels called the Farley Moa. So Martin Sheen sponsors our scientific research sailing boat. So those kind of large corporate, large capital investments go for the purchase of the ship, but the actual running of the ship comes from small donations around the world.
So I hear it's a lot more from individuals or from companies. There isn't a lot of philanthropic funding. So at PhiLab, we focus a lot on grant making. So the foundations that are giving money. And of course, in Canada, being a nonprofit, especially with animals and or environmental based, you can't get charitable status. And so there wouldn't be the possibility of applying for those funds. Do you feel like that has been a significant struggle or an obstacle to getting funding for Sea Shepherd?
Well, we are getting our tax status back in Canada because of the change in laws in 2019. In 1986, we had tax status in Canada up until 1986. Then one day, somebody from Revenue Canada came to visit me, and they said, "Are you opposed to the killing of wolves in northern British Columbia?" "Yes." "Are you aware that the government supports the killing of wolves?" "Yeah." "That's an uncharitable activity. You cannot do anything that the government of Canada disagrees with." "And are you opposed to the seal hunt in Canada?" "Yes." "Do you realize that the Canadian government subsidizes it?" "Yes." "That's an uncharitable activity." That's why we lost our tax status in Canada. But in 2019, apparently they changed the rules, and I believe Greenpeace has gotten their tax status back from that for the same reason. But it was a rather bizarre situation where a charity in Canada could not have tax status if the government disagreed with what they're doing.
It's been a huge debate with this. A lot of environmental organizations and charities, especially under Harper, got shut down and lost their charitable status. And a lot of animal charities that are trying to change the laws to protect animals, but they cannot advocate for legal change. So there's definitely a huge discrepancy between that. And that's why I believe in 2019, when that law came into effect, a lot of organizations are starting to gain more power. And it's really making a shift in the priorities of what can be funded in Canada. Of course, since Sea Shepherd is also international and the different chapters, do they have their own funding strategies individually, or is there also a more global fundraising strategy?
Well, for instance, in Australia, we really had to fight for like 8 years to get our tax status there, because although we have a huge public support in Australia, the government has always been hostile there. But finally, the government couldn't put us off anymore. In New Zealand, they denied Greenpeace the tax status, but gave it to us. But we have a tax status in France and Germany, the UK, Italy, Austria, places like that. But those are all separate. Those are all separate entities, and they're all Sea Shepherd groups in those countries are run by people in those countries. And but we have an umbrella organization sort of called Sea Shepherd Global. Sea Shepherd Global doesn't have any money at all. They're based in Amsterdam, and all Sea Shepherd Global does is coordinate the operations of the ships and everything independently. So the ships aren't linked to Sea Shepherd. Each ship has its own charitable organization. And that's, I don't know if you know anything about shipping, but the problem is that it's a liability issue, So say if a ship gets in trouble, they can sue the whole organization. But the way it is right now, the ship can only be sued, not, and the organization that owns the ship, but the organization that owns the ship isn't Sea Shepherd. Sea Shepherd actually doesn't own any ships, So,
smart strategy.
Well, it's one the shipping industry's used for years and years. So we just sort of do what they do. Um, it's always a challenge because there's always new rules and regulations. One of the latest challenges is that, it cuts into us being able to use volunteers as effectively, is that the registries want to have manning certificates. Now, the reason for this has nothing to do with us, but really has a lot to do with the refugee vessels that are in the Mediterranean, which one of them actually is captained by one of my former officers. She got Banksy to bank from where to do that vessel. But the problem is that these were charitable organizations and they're picking up refugees, which is good, except that the governments in Europe didn't like that. And so to make it harder for them to operate, they said, okay, you're gonna have to have manning certificates. It was one thing to have the captain and the chief engineer and the first officer having proper certification, but these manning certificates are saying everybody has to have proper certification. Every deckhand and all these unskilled things have to have proper certification. So what that forced us to do is that when our volunteers come on board, we have to run them through courses in order to get their certification.
That definitely complicates things a lot.
Yeah, it makes it more difficult. And also, our biggest problem is not actually acquiring ships. Our biggest problem is acquiring skilled officers to run those ships, which is especially challenging because all of our ships are 100% vegan, and getting engineers to sign on to that has been a bit of a struggle. And not only the engineers, but the policing bodies that come on board are in Africa and everything like that. It's interesting. What was it? I think in Gabon, we had 12 soldiers come on board and said, I don't want anything to do with this vegan thing. And they said, okay, you guys make your stuff out on deck and do whatever you want. But if you want to eat the vegan meals, you can. And within 2 days, they're all eating inside, and they felt that the food was better, inside. So, we found that the best way to get people to become vegan is to expose them to it, not to force them into it.
This is definitely a very complex situation with, I had never known about the whole shipping regulations, so it definitely adds an extra level of complexity.
Oh, well, I mean, the regulations are constantly are changing, and they change due to political pressure. And to give you an idea of how bizarre this was, in 2011, there was a situation where we had to go to rescue a Norwegian vessel that had sunk in the McMurdo Sound in Antarctica. I had to fight my way through a storm, a really bad storm, which the HSS Wellington, the New Zealand warship, couldn't make it through, but we made it through. And we did the search. We found the life. Unfortunately, there were no survivors. We found the life raft and supplies and things like this. And we had to go to McMurdo and had a helicopter and refuel. Fine, we get a commendation from New Zealand Search and Rescue. Then I get a letter from the New Zealand Foreign Minister reprimanding me for having gone on to Ross Island without having the proper permit. And that permit takes 3 months to get. And I said, how am I supposed to get a permit when your search and rescue has asked me to go in and find these people? And the guy said, well, because of that, we're not going to fine you this time, but don't do it again. So rather than saying thank you for what we did, this is how some of these governments deal with this,
So definitely.
But then again, it's interesting how people come around. The Australian Environment Minister, Ian Campbell, in 2007, 2008, he was really hostile towards us and, was totally against everything we were doing. 2009, Ian Campbell's the director of Sea Shepherd Australia and our representative to the International Whaling Commission. Completely changed his mind and came out and supported us instead of harassing us.
Well, that's a good sign. Things are starting to change.
Well, yeah, one of our captains is a former chief of staff of the Italian Navy, a former admiral. He's captaining one of our vessels right now. So we're attracting a lot of people that you would not think would be involved in this kind of thing.
So things have definitely changed over nearly 50 years of working with Sea Shepherd. How do you feel? I feel like there's been a lot of speak of how intense and how dire the situation seems for climate change and the climate crisis. Although the past 50 years of action, do you have any still hope for what marine wildlife will be? Like, do you have any glimpse of hopes for what it could be?
Well, I learned a lesson many, many years ago. I was a volunteer medic at Wounded Knee during the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973. And, we were surrounded. There were, 1,300 or 1,500 federal troops, and they were shooting at us 20,000 rounds a night. And, 46 were wounded, 2 were killed. I went to Russell Means. I said, we don't have a hope in hell of winning here. I mean, there's only 350 people here, and these guys got weapons and they got everything like that. They got tanks. Why are we here? I mean, we're not going to do anything. And he looked at me and he said something to me which has stayed with me all my life. He said, we're not here because we're worried about winning or losing. We're not here because we're concerned about the odds against us. We're here because this is the right place to be, the right time to do it, and the right thing to do. Don't worry about the future. Concentrate on the present. What you do in the present will define what the future will be. So that's what I do today. I don't worry about the future. I concentrate on the present. What we do today will define what the future will be. We can't control the future, but we can control the present.
If there are better words to end on than that, I don't know what they would be. So thank you so much. That's all the questions I have for now. If there's anything you feel you would like to share with we're going to be sharing this as a podcast. So if you would like anything to inspire other people to join, or why you feel this is important, it would be great to share now. If not, for me, that was all my questions for today.
Well, the only thing I could add is that, the strength of an ecosystem lies in diversity. Therefore, the strength of any movement must lie with diversity. So it doesn't matter what you do, what your approach is. It could be litigation, it could be legislation, it could be direct action, or it could be education. It doesn't matter. Everybody's efforts all work towards the same end, and that's where the strength of a movement lies. So in many cases, we just simply need to agree to disagree on tactics and approaches, and just accept that we're all contributing towards the same goal. And I see more and more of that happening. The big struggle, of course, right now is climate. It's not climate change. I call it the climate crisis, because that's what it is right now. And I'm not sure that governments will actually do anything about it, because politically, there's nothing they can do about it. It's pretty much political suicide. If any politician, prime minister, president, or government tries to actually do something about it, they're going to be tossed out, because it's going to cause unemployment, it's going to cause jobs, it's going to be corporations are going to be angry. If you go back in Canadian history, back to the early 80s, Prime Minister Joe Clark said that, all he did was say, I think Canadians should be paying the real cost of gasoline, like they do in Europe. So therefore, it shouldn't be subsidized with the government. We've got to really pay where people have to understand how much it really is. 6 months later, he's no longer prime minister. So it's almost like a situation where these guys can't say anything other than they want. Justin Trudeau was the darling of 2015 climate change conference in Paris. Everybody loved Justin Trudeau, and he promised this and he promised that, and he went back and he was just as bad as anybody else, really. Broke every promise and everything. They just can't do it. Now their latest promise was we're going to have no more cutting of old growth forests, no more deforestation as to 2030. Very easy to say in 2021, no more deforestation by 2030, because by the time 2030 comes along, they won't have, that position won't be. Do you think Brazil and Canada is going to stop logging because they said they're going to do it? They're not. All these things are just future promises, which don't hold any water at all. And so the only way that we're going to have any change is through non-government organizations and the passion, the courage, and the imagination of individuals. That's the only thing that's going to make a difference. And because there's only two solutions. We either find an answer, or the answer will be delivered to us by Mother Nature, and it won't be very pleasant. But I always say, when people say, well, it's an impossible problem, but the answer to an impossible problem is to find the impossible solution. And how you do that is through passion, courage, and imagination. The very idea in 1972 that Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa was unthinkable. It was impossible. And yet the impossible became possible. So I think that that holds true for a lot of things. So that gives me hope.
That's great. Maybe just to circle back, since we talked about it, but since obviously governments don't really have the power to implement many of these changes, I guess would that be where the third sector, so nonprofits and philanthropy, can kind of play a bigger role in supporting these different campaigns? So for example, foundations can start actually financing and funding organizations that are trying to protect the environment, trying to protect animals and their well-being.
No, absolutely. That's what they should be doing. And because solutions are not going to come from government. For instance, a few years ago, I took a look at the province of British Columbia. There was a PR company called Burston and Marsteller. It's the largest PR company in the world, represents all the oil companies and everything. That PR company was representing the logging industry in British Columbia. It was representing the government of British Columbia. It was representing the newspaper and television, BCTV, and the Pacific Press. The same PR company representing government, corporation, and the media. And this collusion of those three is what keeps us where we are. The problem isn't fake news. The problem is no news. Things that the media just simply doesn't cover, ignores completely, or unless you force them. For instance, Standing Rock and the pipeline debate and everything, they didn't even want to talk about that until they were forced to do it. But Fukushima, when do you ever hear anything about Fukushima? They're dumping radioactive water into the ocean all the time, but it's never in the news. There's certain things that they decide that they're not going to cover. And that's because of collusion between government, corporations, and the media to decide what they want. And CBC is useless. I always call them controlled by Canada anyway.
No, for sure. It's definitely a very complex situation. So thank you so much for all of this incredible insight. I can't wait to delve into it on a more deep level. So I'll maybe just explain the next steps of what will happen. So of course, I'll be transcribing the interview and working on a written version of the interview to then be published on our blog, on our website. And as well, we're going to be working on a podcast. We're going to be maybe editing, I'll just go to this part as well as the beginning, but we'll send it your way just for validation before. And same thing with the written interview. I'll send it your way just for a quick overview, but I won't be changing anything you say. I'll just be maybe shortening some sentences and moving some things around. But other than that, it'll be pretty straightforward from the transcript. So if that's okay with you, then perfect. No. Well, thank you so much. And of course, we would love for this interview to be shared as much as possible, because I do feel like it's a very unique model of funding that a lot of grassroots organizations can really focus on, that it's not necessarily finding the most money and focusing so much on fundraising, but finding the right people that believe in your cause. And for me, that's what really struck a chord the most from this interview.
Well, I think that every charity should be in the business of putting themselves out of business.
Yes, that's true. I always say that it's when I was working at the SPCA of Montreal, we were always like, my goal is to not have a job, in the sense of not being needed anymore because the issue has been solved. Yeah. So it's definitely a great goal. Well, thank you so much for your time, Annik. Thank you so much for putting us in contact, and I really look forward to sharing with you the fruits of our labor.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And we'll continue doing all the great things here at the chapter in Montreal. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing, and congratulations on those beautiful creatures that you've put on this planet to continue the wonderful work that you've done. You have 2 beautiful children that will be able to continue your legacy. So thank you so much for everything, Paul. And thank you, Katherine, for sharing this space with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Aloha.
Bye.